Hi, this is Tim McKean from Herberger Online, and I'm here with Courtney Sanders and Justin Schul. We're all instructional designers for the Herberger Online Learning Department, and we'd like to talk a little bit today about proctoring your online exams. So first, we wanted to kind of talk about what are some of the main proctoring options we have available to us at ASU. And right now, the two main proctoring options that are typically used are a product called RP Now, um, which is a solution where exam takers are recorded, and then there's actually a live human staff member at RP Now that reviews the recordings and looks for any kind of signals that there was any cheating going on or anything outside of the policy. The other option is something called the Respondus Lockdown Monitor, or the Respondus Lockdown Browser, or Respondus Monitor. The browser keeps students from opening new browser windows and perusing other sources, and the monitor does a similar thing to RP Now, where it turns on a webcam and records students as they're taking the exam. Right now, the recommendation is that to not think of RP Now as your first go-to or your first idea, mainly because of, in this current situation, so many the RP Now is backlogged, and they're just not able to get to all the exams that are already being recorded. So that may not be a viable solution, or may not be a helpful solution to you. Courtney, do you want to talk a little bit more about the Lockdown Monitor and the Lockdown Browser?
So, right, the Respondus Lockdown Browser makes sure that students are only in your exam on their computer when they're taking the exam. So that can prohibit them from Googling answers to the test. But one thing I would mention is that it doesn't prevent them from having another device open where they could potentially be finding other ways around finding answers to the test. And then the Respondus Monitor uses the student's own webcam to record what's going on in their environment, but then that would need to be reviewed by the instructor. But there are certain things that you can do to put in place to make sure they do a scan of their room, they do a scan of their whole environment, and that they also do that at the end. And there's some articles out there with extra help tips too, and also what you want to include on the exam instruction so that students know exactly what's expected from the instructor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Lockdown Browser is actually a browser, like Chrome or like Firefox, where students would need to launch that browser, log into Canvas, and it keeps them from opening other windows or other things like that. So it does take a little bit of setup. It takes a little bit of training, both for the instructor and for the student, to be able to access that correctly. So if you're thinking about using Lockdown Browser in your course, definitely schedule a practice exam or a practice quiz where students can get that going the first time and make sure that that's working for them before any kind of high stakes exam comes along.
Right, I would say the same for if you're planning on using Respondus Monitor to do a practice exam with no point value.
Mm-hmm. Justin, did you say that your son had used one of these?
Yeah, he's mainly used the Respondus Monitor because he's a student at ASU. So, he goes into the library to find a quiet environment, and he has to, take his laptop and spin it around so that they can see the whole room that he's in. And if anybody comes in the room or talks to him, whatever, it gets recorded. And so, somebody goes through and can review those, especially if they are suspicious of his results.
Right. Yeah, so that's definitely something to think about, is that if you're thinking about using a Lockdown Browser or a Respondus Monitor specifically, that students do need to have a camera on their computer or a laptop that has a camera included, and otherwise they won't be able to take the exam. And so that's something to think about and make sure that everyone has that resource available to them. And then that will require that you or a TA or a grader or somebody go back and then look at those recordings as well. Monitor does a good job trying to put up some red flags. So it's got some AI built into it where if it sees the student leave for a period of time and come back, or if it sees two people in the frame, it will throw up a red flag and notify the instructor. So you can go back and look for those things. So you don't necessarily, I mean, if it's a 1 hour exam, you don't have to watch 1 hour of video for every student, but you can kind of click through. It also shows a thumbnail view where you can see, I don't know what it is, every minute or every some number of seconds, but you can quickly browse through the thumbnails and see if you see anything suspicious. But in general, I would say most of these things are simply deterrents.
I guess one caution I would have with Respondus Monitor or even ProctorU, given that everybody is doing working, studying from home, some students might not have a place where they can get away from their kids or their dogs, or like my son, I've got 4 other kids at home and they're all running around, and so he has to go to the library to find a quiet place. And if that's not an option now that people are social distancing, then that might also prevent someone from taking an exam if they aren't able to use their camera because of that type of situation.
Yeah. So if we move away from some of the more specific monitoring commercial offerings, software packages, what are some alternatives that you would recommend to faculty if they need to give an exam online? Maybe they haven't taught online before, and so this is the first time doing that. What are some things they can think about in order to make their exams less cheatable or a little bit more secure?
Well, one of the things I always recommend is just the way that they build the exam. Canvas, for example, lets you do time limits, and so if I'm going to say give my final exam in class, or it's going to be an hour-long exam, for example, I'm going to have probably 60, 70 questions on there, so that students are not, they don't really have time to say Google answers, or if they don't know the content, they're not going to be able to go through and answer every question. Or I'll have a mixture of multiple choice and essay type questions where they're taking a longer time, but they still have to do it within that time limit. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing. Essay type questions or open-ended questions where it's easier to catch students who might be copying from one another because their answers are very similar, or right, they've used the same organization in an essay, for example, those types of things. But so that's one thing that I think you could do. Mm-hmm. One thing I'm planning to try is to actually open up a Zoom call during an exam and have all the students log into Zoom to get the password for the exam. Mm-hmm. And then while they're in Zoom, they'll have all their cameras open. And so I'll just have them all up. And during the exam, I'll just be watching them and basically proctoring the exam myself, just like I would if we were in the classroom.
Yeah, so that's a good observation. So we're in gallery view now in this call. And so when in gallery view, you can see all your students at one time. And so Zoom really allows you to kind of treat this the same way you would in your physical classroom, where you are actively monitoring your students as they're taking their exams, even if they're not here. You could even, with Zoom, no, I should think about that before I say it. Can you have all your students share their screens at the same time?
No, only one person can share a screen.
Right, okay. So monitoring the camera would let you know if they're kind of looking around at their phone, or if they've got their text, or if they've got friends around there with them, would kind of help monitor that too.
Depending on the number of students you have, like if I make the gallery view fill my whole screen, I can fit probably about 20 or so students before then I have to start scrolling.
Yeah.
So, I have 30 something students in my class. And so if more than 20 or so log on, I have to kind of scroll to view them, to view them all. But I guess if you had, a couple hundred students in your class, you might have to be scrolling up and down quite a bit in order to make sure that you're viewing all the students' cameras at one time. or being able to at least monitor all the students' cameras.
And that would be similar to scanning the room in your classroom.
Right. And
I
if
guess
you're recording the Zoom call, if there is something that you miss, you can go back and look at the recording where you would still see, you would still might be able to see some other things if you needed to.
Yeah.
And for larger classes that might not be able to utilize a Zoom call to record all the students at once, I would go back to Justin, what you said earlier about the Canvas options in the quizzes. There's a lot of options that you can use. The randomize the questions, do random question pool banks so that students are getting a mix of questions. And yes, mix it up so that take a look at how much value is on the multiple choice type questions versus short answer, essay, even using discussion posts as graded assessments. Just look at your assessment mix.
Yeah, and my favorite solution is still what Justin mentioned, just being real conscious or even aggressive about your exam timing. If you think about if you've got 25 questions, and if it's multiple choice kind of information recall kind of things, how long does it take to remember something that you know? If you know it, it takes 10, 30 seconds maybe. If you don't know it, maybe then it takes longer to try to think of it. So I'm happy sometimes setting exam timings really aggressively, like maybe 20 seconds per question, 30 seconds per question, 10 seconds per question, if it's that kind of quick recall. And that really keeps people from even just having the opportunity to look up all the answers. And so if your goal for your exam is really testing their immediate recall, do you know this information off the top of your head, then timings are a good answer to that. And then the longer term question to ask yourself is the harder question, is the exam really the best way to assess that learning, or are there other ways of assessing learning now that we're teaching in a different format that would be more appropriate to the new venue? For example, is making a video where the students talk about or give a presentation about what they've learned on a topic. Can they make an infographic? Can they create something that's unique that would be, not as easily cheatable or copyable than simply a multiple choice exam? So that's another question to ask yourself as well. I also worked with one instructor that used a tool like Zoom, or it was a screen recording tool like Screencast-O-Matic, or most computers have some kind of camera app built into them where they can record, where she had her students just record themselves as they took their exam. And the tool she was using allowed them to record their camera and their screen. So when they submitted their exam, they also submitted the link to their recording. So it was kind of like a self-monitor thing where it was on themselves to record their exam session. And so if you really need to be asynchronous and allow your students to take it at a different time, then that might be another way to do that too. And again, it's really a deterrent. I suppose if a student really wanted to cheat bad enough, they could figure out how to fake it one time for the camera and then do it again or something. But most students are not going to do that. And it's really just a way of keeping the honest. Any other thoughts about monitoring or exam techniques?
I like that idea, Tim, of recording, students record on their own and submitting that with the exam.
Yeah. And I liked Courtney's idea too about going back and making sure that you're really looking at what those quiz or exam settings are in Canvas. And there are a lot of those in there that you might find value. Again, we talked about timings. We talked about shuffling the the questions. I don't think it shuffles the questions. I think it'll shuffle the answers. Is that correct?
You can do both.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and if you're using banks, you can have a bank of 100 questions, and you might tell it to give each student 20, and so that each student is getting a mix of different questions so that they're not all taking the exact same exam. That one has issues as far as, you know, is it really fair if all the students aren't asking the same question? But that's something that you can decide for yourself and for your course. There's also the option for Canvas to only show one question at a time, so that no one is printing out or taking a screenshot of all the questions at once and then coming back. You also have the option to only limit how many attempts a student has. And so be sure that you're kind of familiar with those Canvas settings so that you're getting the most out of that, out of the tool that's there.
Right, and what you show the students once they've completed the exam, you can look at that so that maybe you're not showing the students the correct answers that then they can go share with a classmate until the exam is fully closed. And I guess another thing I wanted to mention is the exam window of taking the exam, that you might not want to have the exam open for an entire week, maybe just a 24-hour window, or even an hour-long window, or when your class would be meeting to set that exam time for a shorter time, plus have the time limit once you've started the exam.
Great. So I think our general recommendation is that there are some packages that are available for monitoring and for proctoring exams, but we don't recommend them. If you need something, the Respondus offerings, the Respondus Lockdown Browser or the Respondus Monitor, are both free options, and we have licenses to those, and those are already integrated in Canvas that you can turn those on. It does take some setup on your part. UTO's help desk can help you with that in Canvas, but it does also take some setup on the student's part. So you're going to have some transition setup time and some back and forth maybe with your students helping to get that set up on their end. But our better or the easier recommendation is to just really dig into those Canvas settings, think about your timings, your availability windows, and that will help mitigate a lot of the issues there. And then just go think about your exam and think about whether that assessment is the best way to assess your student learning, or if there's another way that we can assess learning that's less susceptible to academic integrity issues. And obviously, if you'd like to talk more about this, you can reach out to any of us on the HIDA support Slack channel, or look us up in Outlook. All our names are on the screen now, and we're just Timothy.McKean, Courtney.Sanders, and Justin.Schul@asu.edu if you want to reach out specifically. So hope that answered some of your general questions, and we look forward to talking to you more if you have a specific situation that needs more attention. Thanks.
Thank you.